Sotheby's, London. July 2008. The room is doing what these rooms always do. Paddles rise, numbers climb, objects move between wealthy hands with the practiced theater of a man in a suit reading from a script. Lot 69, a small painting, roughly the size of a hardcover book. St. Anthony, airborne, surrounded by demons. Attribution, workshop of Domenico Ghirlandaio, a student copy. Estimate, modest. The kind of number that tells you the auction house didn't spend too long looking. The bidding opens, moves quickly. Someone pays $2 million and the room moves on. The buyer wasn't certain, but they weren't buying the attribution either. Something in the catalog photographs, something in the specific way each demon's scale sat against the one below it and caught light at an angle, didn't fit the label workshop copy. It was a hunch, the kind that costs $2 million to test. They took it home, sent it for cleaning, and waited. Before we get to what they found, look at the painting. It's small, tempera and oil on wooden panel, 18.5 inches by 13.75. St. Anthony hangs in the center, gripped midair by creatures climbing out of the shadows around him. His face is turned away, but not quite escaped. There's something in his expression, not the conventional anguish of martyrdom, not the theatrical suffering that fills 100 other versions of this subject. Something more interior, more like a man trying to concentrate through noise he cannot shut out. Then the demons, each one individually rendered. These aren't the generic monsters you find in typical workshop copies, often stiff, decorative, and essentially symbols. These demons have weight, scaled hides, and lifelike claws. A furry creature on the upper left with a stick in hand, ready to pound the saint. Another figure below it, whose skin has the texture of something clearly painted from close observation of actual fish scales. And below, half emerging from the frame, pulling at the saint's robes, something amphibious and pale, with claws specific enough to belong to an actual species. The composition is lifted from a famous engraving by Martin Schongauer, the most celebrated printmaker in Northern Europe. Any apprentice in a Florentine workshop in the 1480s would have known it, but in the lower frame, something that isn't in Schongauer's engraving at all. A landscape. Hills receding into distance, a valley with a particular quality of evening light, a ship sailing somewhere. To understand how strange all of this is, you need to understand what a Florentine workshop apprenticeship actually was. Domenico Ghirlandaio's bottega was the most prestigious in Florence in the 1480s. Families paid for placement, and what you did inside it, especially in your first years, was copy. You reproduced the master's drawings. You replicated established compositions. You learned by submission to the source material, building your hand through repetition rather than invention. This was the curriculum, and it was deliberate. Invention without mastery was considered not just premature, but actively damaging. An apprentice handed Schongauer's engraving and told to copy it was expected to do exactly that. His St. Anthony was precise, authoritative, technically brilliant. The correct response was careful reproduction. Whoever made this painting did not do this. Hold Schongauer's engraving beside it. The structure is the same saint, same mid-air suspension, same general assembly of tormentors. But Schongauer's demons are convincing the way skilled craftwork is convincing. Correctly rendered, properly placed, doing their assigned symbolic work. These are something else. They have individual weight. The saint's expression has been changed from conventionally anguished to something more internal, and the landscape has been replaced entirely. What kind of apprentice would do this? As of July 2008, the attribution still read Workshop of Domenico Ghirlandaio, which is where Keith Christensen came in. Adam Williams, an art dealer who bought the painting, brought the painting to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. Christensen, the Met's curator of Italian paintings and one of the foremost authorities on Renaissance panel painting alive, began where you always begin, cleaning. What came off the surface was centuries of discolored varnish. the kind that accumulates in layers and slowly shifts the color relationships the painter intended, yellowing what was cool, darkening what was bright. Underneath a palette that had been waiting 500 years to be seen. Then came the infrared reflectography. IRR imaging reads beneath the paint surface. It reveals the underdrawing, the skeleton of thought made before the first stroke of paint. In a workshop copy, the underdrawing is mechanical. You transfer the source, stay close to it, fill it in. What Christiansen found was different. Pentimenti, revision marks, places where the hand had stopped, reconsidered, redrawn. Not a copyist following a template, a mind discovering its own solutions in real time. The cross-hatching in the shadows was emphatic and personal, entirely inconsistent with Bottega production work. It was the trace of someone thinking, not transcribing. Giorgio Vasari had mentioned it in 1550, a copy after Schongauer he wrote, made by a talented boy in Ghirlandaio's workshop. He named the boy Michelangelo, then moved on. Ascanio Condivi was less casual. Condivi wrote what amounted to an authorized biography, a text Michelangelo himself oversaw. He confirmed the painting as Michelangelo's, then added something Ghirlandaio might have preferred left out. The master had tried to claim it as his workshop's production. This was false. The materials, the print, the paint, the brushes, had come from Francesco Granacci, a slightly older friend of the boy. Ghirlandaio was jealous, Condivi wrote flatly. The student had made something the master wanted credit for. Condivi also told the story of the fish market. To make the demons convincing, Michelangelo went to the San Lorenzo market, stood in the stalls, studied dead fish, how scales overlap, how they sit at different angles, how the flesh near the gills holds color differently than the body. He brought specimens home, repainted the demon hides from direct observation. After Condivi's account, the painting passed quietly into private hands, through a collection in Pisa in the 1830s, then to Paris, then to an English country estate, then into the long anonymous circulation of objects owned by people who don't know what they have. Until 452 years later, the final confirmation. This was a Michelangelo, painted around 1487. He would have been 12. One of only 4 surviving panel paintings by Michelangelo, the first mark by the Michelangelo that would paint the Sistine ceiling. One last thing about the painting before we leave it. Those hills in the background, well, they've been identified with reasonable confidence as the hills outside a particular village above Florence, Settignano, where he learned the shape of a valley before he learned that his family's name was supposed to mean something else. That's all to say that the fish market anecdote is not an anomaly. It's the same instinct, the same refusal to let anything stay abstract. A demon's scales needed to be real because the hills behind the saint were real. He couldn't paint from a symbol. He had to find the thing first, touch it, bring it back to the panel still wet. It's the same instinct that would, decades later, send Michelangelo into Florentine hospitals to study cadavers. He had to touch to build. Take, for example, the Sistine Chapel ceiling. God and Adam reaching toward each other across a gap, surrounded by bodies built from years in anatomy theaters, cadavers drawn and redrawn until Michelangelo understood exactly how weight moves through a shoulder, how grief changes the geometry of a spine. These aren't bodies invented in a studio, but bodies the way the fish were fish, observed until they gave up what a symbol never could. Or the Pietà, a mother's grief expressed through the specific physics of holding a grown man's weight across your lap. The angles worked through hundreds of studies until the emotional truth and the physical truth became the same truth. Or the Medici tombs, figures that look less like monuments than like people interrupted as if time had stopped mid-thought for them specifically. The instinct runs through everything he made. This need to find, look at, and hold the actual thing underneath the sacred idea and build upward from there. It wasn't a method he developed. It was already present in the hills he painted without thinking twice about it. but those hills belonged to a boy who was not supposed to be painting at all. You see, Michelangelo was born Michelangelo di Lodovico Buonarroti Simoni in 1475 into a family with a name they considered worth protecting. His father, Lodovico, held minor administrative posts. The Buonarroti were minor Florentine nobility, not wealthy or powerful, but persuaded that their lineage carried a dignity that certain kinds of work would compromise. Painting was manual labor, sculpture was a craft. These were occupations for people without standing. And so, when the young Michelangelo began to draw obsessively, Lodovico is said to have beaten him for it. The boy's fixation was an embarrassment, a threat to what the name was supposed to mean. His mother, Francesca, was frail. She fell pregnant again quickly after his birth, and infant Michelangelo Buonarroti was sent away to the hills of Settignano, a village above Florence, northeast of the city. There, he was placed with a wet nurse, the wife of a stonecutter. He lived there through his earliest years, before the Buonarroti name meant anything to him at all. He was shaped in the most elemental sense in a place where people cut stone for a living, where the hills had a particular color in the afternoon, and the light came from a specific direction across the valley. So when a 12-year-old apprentice was told to copy an engraving, these hills just ended up in the background. It was the first landscape he knew. Later in life, he told Vasari that whatever skill he had came from drinking his wet nurse's milk in Settignano. It's nothing if not ironic. All the years Lodovico spent trying to dissuade his son from being an artist to protect the family name, and the only reason it has survived is his art. Beginning with this painting, a painting that sold for $2 million, misattributed and nameless. Now valued at over $100 million. Not because anything in it changed, but because one word changed, the name attached to it, the name his father thought art would ruin.